Welcome to episode 81, Breaking a Promise. I promise you I won't ask you to turn on closed captioning. I can say that because, as with line, see episode 52, who amongst us can say that I've never experienced someone breaking a promise? Internal joke. Definitely not you after this opening paragraph. Just as I avoid telling lies, I try not to break promises because I know how it hurts when somebody breaks a promise to me. But unlike with lies, I know I've broken some serious promises in my life, and I regret them. Internal joke. All of them? Even though in defense, I can argue that some of them have been, for the most part, simply beyond what I can control. You know, I used to live near an airport, JFK International Airport to be specific. And for 7 or 8 years, spanning the first couple decades of this century, various acquaintances of mine essentially made me their free Uber driver. Imagine driving from near JFK, where I lived, to Brooklyn or Manhattan or the Bronx to pick up people, and then take them back to JFK. I did this many times for many people for many years. Why? Well, for some, I did it because they were family. And you do things for family because they are family. But for most, it was simply out of friendship. I stopped when two incidents in particular with two different persons opened my eyes to just how much I was being exploited. These two persons, one of whom I'd actually met years earlier, about a year after I moved to New York City, had assisted me in getting a place to rent, or as I say, catch, a couple of times during my travels in the Caribbean in past years. I thought they were exhibiting friendship to me by doing so, so I tried to exhibit friendship to them by conveying them to and from the airport if they asked me to do so when they visited New York City. And through social media, I was reminded of both of these persons recently, which actually is what prompted me to do this therapeutic blog episode. One of the persons was someone who had taken from JFK to the Bronx, or vice versa a few times. But his last free ride occurred the time when I picked him up, and he sprung on me that for this visit he was going to New Jersey. We were on the way before he gave me an address for my Garmin. And the killer was that what he had intimated was a short ride from JFK to just across the Hudson River turned out to be a 2-hour gas-burning trip to some place in south central New Jersey that I'd never heard of and don't care to remember. I seriously had not been looking for compensation, and there had been none the other times I'd given him a ride. But that night, it was difficult to hear him talk about the gifts he was loaded up with for other people as I gave him a free ride from the airport, a $100 at least ride. On the long, toll-heavy ride back home, I resolved to make myself unavailable for any more requests from that person. I reached home around 1 a.m., about 5 hours from when I'd picked him up, feeling used and scammed, and proceeded to delete him from my contacts. So when he contacted me on social media recently and wanted to renew a social relationship, I brought up the incident and actually debated with him what I should do. And I guess we can renew a social relationship as long as it's only via social media. Because I cannot think of him without remembering that feeling of being used or scammed, so I cannot get back close to him. Similarly, I debated to myself recently whether to read this article I saw online that was written by this other acquaintance I mentioned above. He used to travel to New York City frequently and often take him to Brooklyn or Harlem from JFK, giving him free rides that could sometimes be as much as an hour depending on traffic and where he was staying. Then, one time when I picked him up at the airport, he asked me to store a suitcase and a box for him, and I agreed since I had a basement space. I had a suitcase and box for a couple of years, and during that time would remind him whenever I took him from or to the airport. Finally, one day he asked me to bring the suitcase with me when I was coming to pick him up to take him to the airport. Then, perhaps a year later, I was flying to Florida where he now lived, and he asked me to bring the box. I told him that my ticket was carry-on only, so he promised, and on my insistence, re-promised that he would reimburse me the $35 for bringing his box as a checked luggage. We met in a parking lot near where he lived, and I delivered the box to him with the full expectation of getting back my $35. Unfortunately, these many years later, I'm still waiting for my money and still feeling used and scammed every time I'm reminded of him. And I'm sure he's wondering why I've been so distant and unable to transport him to and from the airport since that last time. The thing is, breaking a promise is like breaking a trust, and it lingers in one's memory. It's not that I can't afford to lose the $35 to that person. It's because I cannot think of him without remembering that feeling of being used or scammed. So I'm here to read this article. Over the years, there have been so many people I know who have asked me for money, and I've given them what I can, and we have remained close. And there are some people who have asked me to lend them money, and I've loaned them what I can afford to lose, see episode 53, and we are no longer close. You know, it's relatively easy to put distance between you and somebody you feel is using or scamming you, unless, per episodes 14 and 22, the person is someone who makes you feel that staying away is like breaking a promise of love.